So welcome to Best Practices for Delivering an Online Course. So glad you're here this afternoon, and hopefully those of you that have decided to view it later or you're looking at the archive online, welcome to the online version. My name is Tracy Miller, and I'm the online teaching coordinator in the Faculty Development Instructional Design Center, and I'm happy to share with you this afternoon some of these best practices that we've kind of gathered together that I think can really enhance your online teaching. Yay, my my photo came out. Yes, Bernard. Sometimes for some weird reason, the photos kind of don't want to pop up on the screen. So I'm happy that it did this afternoon. My objectives for this afternoon is to really give you some practical strategies on how to communicate with your students, how to be more efficient maybe with your grading when you're grading your students' work, or maybe providing your students with feedback, and then some ways that you can really support your online students to be the most successful that they can. So hopefully that's what everybody is here for. We have an entire series of online teaching best practices at this point, and we have a whole series of online course design elements and components and practices in the design realm. And this one in particular on best practices covers a lot of the best practices in kind of an introductory level, and those other sort of workshops kind of dig deeper into some of them. So if you are interested in a particular topic that I cover, but you kind of want to go deeper into it, let me know. We can definitely recommend the archive from that particular one, or even sit down and have a one-on-one conversation about, again, digging deeper into some of those things that I'm just sort of going to introduce today. On the screen before you see sort of this pie graphic of all the different things that are important to a good online educational experience. And you can see anywhere from what I just talked about with course design all the way down to, are the students ready for this experience? This particular workshop, we're really going to talk about the course delivery element. So yes, there's definitely other things that are important to building this environment. Today, we're going to stick with the delivery a little bit more. And what I mean by delivery is, the actual teaching, what's happening while the course is sort of unfolding. Sometimes that means that, maybe you're teaching something for the first time, or you're teaching it online for the first time. But sometimes you're also handing over a course maybe that you've already taught to someone new. And so kind of giving this information where they don't have a lot of experience with designing the course, but they will have a lot of experience with delivering it. These best practices are important for that. So my big point this afternoon is that all of these best practices are not so different than what you would do in a face-to-face course, or an on-ground course, it's also can be called. You're still going to do all these things. You're still going to engage and communicate with your students. You're still going to assess what they're learning, and you still want to create an environment that's supportive as possible. So what I would suggest, what's different about online, is that you may approach some of these things a little bit differently. And so sometimes our initial instinct is to just sort of take what we're doing face-to-face and just sort of try to reproduce it online. And these techniques and these approaches that I'm suggesting this afternoon can really enhance that experience and take advantage of some of the things that happen online that maybe cannot as easily take place in a face-to-face course. So, first one I talked about was communicating with your students. Online education can get sort of a bad rap of there's no way you can get to know each other because you're not seeing each other face to face. And so there's this sort of maybe an excuse. Well, it can't happen, so I guess there's nothing I can do about it. But it's still very important that you get to know each other in an online environment. And so, here's some of my best practices and some of my tips and suggestions. First is to think about the student's motivation for why they're there. And then what can you do in order to sort of tap into that motivation? So my first one is that, students, they're all about them, right? They have this self-interest, and a lot of times when they're selecting an online course or an online program, um, it's because of something that is unique about them. When I was an online student, I was the classic case of a working mother that just was trying to find a flexible space in order to continue on with my education. And so, that is sort of the traditional online student, but there's all types of students that are tapping in online at this point. And so sort of taking that knowledge and, what can you do? Well, one of the things you can do is, not only try to connect the materials to the student's interest, and that may be, professional development or that idea of flexibility, but share something personal about yourself that will help them get to know you and maybe connect to you a little bit more. So one of the ways, what do I mean by personal but not intimate? Share maybe just some general hobbies that you have or professional background that you have, maybe something current going on in your life. Just again, to make you feel a little bit like a more of a real person, not just kind of this person behind the online curtain. And students often will kind of tap into that. So for instance, if you share a hobby with them, they will then, maybe if they have a similar hobby, they feel that connection to you. So that can be sort of, important, and it allows them to kind of connect with you a little bit more. And then if they do share something about themselves, express an interest in it somehow. Even if it, kind of getting back to that self-interest part, identify that, wow, I see that you've got a lot going on this semester, and, I really applaud your dedication to your academics or something like that. Whatever it is that kind of they share with you, let them know that you kind of, acknowledge that and you kind of respect that. Of course, students are very motivated by their academic life. That's why they're pursuing, either higher education or this particular course. And so let them know how this particular course is related to their academic life, and maybe let them know how it may be important to their academic life, even if there doesn't seem to be a natural connection to it. Let's say it's a course that's sort of a little bit off program or something like that. And just showing them that relevance beyond just saying, okay, this is the next course in your sequence, or this happened to be, fit into your schedule. It's important for them because it's going to motivate them to go kind of above and beyond. But beyond that, make sure I should probably reverse these. Let them know what your expectations are in order for them to be able to meet your expectations, and expectations on how this is going to relate to their particular academic growth in this course. But then also identify and reward what you value. So, maybe that value that you have is articulated in your expectations, but make sure you let them know what they are and then kind of applaud them when they meet those expectations. In some ways, what's the easiest reward? A grade. Let them know that that's being reflected in their grade because they did kind of meet your expectation or maybe exceed your expectation. Next, recognize that students are not only taking this course for their academics, but also for their future career, their future professional life. And so it's kind of the same as what I was talking about, their academic life. Let them know how this is going to really help them in the future, in their profession. And there's no greater way to do that than actually show that passion and that enthusiasm. And, you can, if you're doing a virtual session like this or a video recording, you can kind of see that enthusiasm. But if you're not using that type of media, you have to sort of decide how you're going to show that passion and enthusiasm in some other way. But just whatever way it is, just make sure you show it. And then if there's any sort of common skill, whether it be presentation styles, writing skills, work ethic, if that's embedded into your maybe a secondary outcome that you have, let the students know that, hey, this is going to really enhance these skills above and beyond the course and definitely help you out in your future. And then the final one, if they are working professionals, just let them know that you understand that and maybe even allow them a chance to kind of use their experience and maybe kind of adapt it into the course that they're taking with you. I'm going to take a moment for a just quick drink of water, but I also want to make sure I catch up on my attendance as I see people have come into the space. So I've done this particular workshop a couple times now, but I went back and I kind of enhanced it this time. And I think that's something that you might want to do when you're delivering an online course is, you might have done it a couple times and maybe it's become a little stale. And so always kind of reflect back and look at what you can do differently. So one of the things that I've done is I've been looking at some of the new features that are going to come out Memorial Day weekend when we upgrade Blackboard. And so one of the ways I think you can kind of get to know each other and get to know your students a little bit more is to use the My EDU function, which is in Blackboard. I'm not sure how many folks are already using it, but we've had it only just this past year. But it's kind of an interesting tool where students and anybody really part of the NIU community can create these kind of profiles. And that's something where if you've used the discussion board already and you kind of always see these silhouetted faces, all of a sudden you'll be able to see their My EDU faces in there, and you can see they can be kind of casual. You can also put all kinds of interests in there and maybe goals that you have. And again, just a different way that you can kind of get to know each other a little bit more. Sorry, I'm just checking the room again. Oh, Candace just arrived. Candace, I'm just marking you as attended. Thank you for joining us. We just kind of got started, and so if you feel like you missed anything, we will have an archive of this later so that you'll be able to kind of go back and take a look. So my next one is the idea of, okay, now you're getting to know each other, but let's keep that communication frequent, and kind of use a variety of different ways to communicate with each other, so everybody can kind of tap into it. Here's a great couple ways to communicate frequently. The first one is to use Blackboard announcements, and this is actually a screenshot of an announcement. You might want to commit to a consistent announcement, maybe once a week, maybe even twice a week, but also use them to remind your students of something that's coming up, perhaps a due date, maybe a milestone, maybe even a review session. The announcements is a good tool for using that. I think it's, again, so we're thinking about how that might compare to what you do in a face-to-face course. It's very natural to kind of enter the classroom and have a few reminders at the beginning, of what's coming due and what's kind of happening in the course right now. And so using the announcement feature is another way of doing that, only you're doing it in an online course. I would also suggest it's a good way to use Blackboard in a face-to-face course. And so the students are getting those reminders in kind of two different ways. Kind of jumping outside of Blackboard, this tool, and chime in if you've heard of it and used it, called Remind.com, is actually a free mobile messaging service. It's a way to send text messages to your students, and it'll go right to their phones. That's, that's what the students are doing. They've always got their mobile device in their hands, and they're going to get this text message from you. But the service is they won't be necessarily seeing it coming from your personal cell phone number. So it kind of lets you keep your personal cell phone number personal, and you can use Remind.com for your students. So I think that's kind of a good tool that I've seen a lot of folks have good success with. Any Remind.com folks out there? I'm not seeing any responses. Maybe this is something I've introduced you to. So the next thing about communication with your students is how the whole communication is going to unfold while you're delivering that course. And so you want to think about it ahead of time, and you want to communicate who you are and how you plan to communicate with your students kind of in that design phase, but you want to make sure you commit to it when you're actually delivering the course. And so down in the bottom here, I have communication expectations, in which I'm stating that, there is one option to communicate, which is the question and answer discussion forum, and that if you use the communication, this type of communication, you can expect some sort of response from me within 24 to 48 hours. Again, that's just my policy. You can kind of come up with your own policy. But then again, when you're delivering that course, you want to kind of commit to that. So be thoughtful about what that means. Perhaps you are not open to responding off business hours or on the weekends, or maybe that's the best time to kind of get your questions answered. Whatever it is, kind of set that policy up, and then when you're delivering the course, really commit to that, because your students can definitely feel sort of isolated that way. The other thing when you're delivering a course, let the students know if what your expectations are for them to communicate with each other, again, so they can meet your expectations. So kind of taking it a little bit beyond the text route. I talked a little bit about if you had the opportunity and maybe the gumption to use the video a little bit more, that's a perfect way to really put a face to that person, that cares about your learning. And not only from the instructor side, but also for the students. If the students want to create videos, they all sort of become real somehow that way. It's almost like using the My EDU profiles where you suddenly get to see a face next to those discussion posts. Now maybe you see the students' enthusiasm and animation because you're using videos. And so in this case, I'm using a video, and one of the times I did this particular workshop, everyone wanted to click on my video. This is just a screenshot, so nothing's going to happen with the video, but I just kind of threw it in there to show you what they could look like. I'm in my office like I am now, so it puts me in my professional environment too, but you can also, again, be a little bit more personal, and maybe you're sitting at a coffee shop and you're kind of showing them, hey, sometimes I need to kind of just step out of the office too and get some work done someplace else, and it makes you a little bit more human. Bernard's noticing my different hairstyle. Yes, I've got some crazy hair, and so all kinds of things happen with my hair. And I cut it short, I grow it long. It's, that's part of my personality, I guess. The other thing that's really good about using a video is, it gives you that visual, but you want to make sure that you also make your videos accessible. So in this case, I took the screenshot while the closed captioning was on. So students could not only see me, but perhaps if they were watching a video on a noisy train, they could also read the transcript. But of course, it's very important for students with hearing disabilities. So another good practice. Another one that I think folks are starting to catch on to, but maybe they haven't thought about using this as a communication tool, is the retention center. And so I'm not going to talk in depth about the retention center. If you're curious about it, again, I can send you some resources on that. But the retention center is just capturing some data on how the students are using and interacting in Blackboard. And so you can send out messages from the retention center regarding these different categories here. So we've got missed deadlines, grades alert, activity alert, and access alert. And so if you have deadlines, first you have to put due dates in there, and the students would have to miss them. But if you have any of these sort of alerts and you're watching the students, it's so easy through the retention center to use this button that's up at the top here, notify, in order to notify your students that you're seeing something that has you concerned. So for instance, if they are consistently missing deadlines, use the retention center to notify them that you've noticed this, and that come up with a solution. Maybe you would like to have further conversations on this. But what I love about the retention center is that it has this notification history at the bottom, which kind of keeps track of all these notifications that you're having with the students. And that way it's keeping you really organized. So for instance, maybe a student only missed one deadline, so you're not really concerned yet, but you're going to reach out to them because it was kind of important. And then in a week you're going to go back and maybe want to follow up with them if they haven't responded back to you. I have a question here. Where is the retention center located in Blackboard? In the left-hand navigation area under the evaluation tab. So there's a performance dashboard and there is a retention center and a couple other things under there. So that's one of the easiest ways, I think, to get to the retention center. Again, I could talk about the retention center for a long time because I think it's a great tool on a variety of levels, but definitely the one to communicate with your student is important. Because you did have an interest in the retention center, I will tell you that it's definitely set up to monitor at-risk students that are kind of triggering these alerts. You can use it for the reverse and set up some criteria for students that maybe, if you look at the grades alert, it's looking for you know, something that's below average. You can kind of switch those up a little bit and look for students that are maybe well above the class average. And then instead of using this as a communication tool for at-risk students, you can use it as a communication tool for students that are really impressive and you want to kind of acknowledge that and recognize their dedication. So it doesn't always have to be sort of more of the negative side of things, but it can be something to, again, tap into that motivation a little bit more for students that are doing well. Okay, so we're going to switch to gears. We've talked a lot about communication and kind of getting to know your students. We're going to switch gears, like I just said, a little bit to some strategies for grading. But I want to pause for just a moment in case anyone has any questions or comments about what I mentioned as far as communication goes. Okay, and again, feel free to kind of just add your questions or comments, and I will pause at different times, check it out. But I think one of the important things when we talk about grading is it's really helping students keep track of what's going on in the course. I'm going to pause because I see Sheila added something. If you send out a message with remind.com and the students reply, where does the reply go? I don't think it has a reply function. I'm not sure. Sometimes they've, you know, they'll have an enhanced feature or something like that. But it's definitely meant more of a one-way, you know, kind of a blast thing that goes out. Great. Okay, so getting back to what's so important about grading is, you know, definitely grading is important and it's important to their grade, but kind of as you're grading different components and providing your student with feedback, what you're doing is you're helping them keep track of where they're at in the course at any given time. You know, in order to for them to feel confident, feel nervous, allow you to know where they're at. And so here's a couple things that you can do to really help your students and yourself keep on track with things. First of all, let your students know what your grading policies are and how you plan to grade them and what your procedures are. And thanks for adding a link there, Alex. And that's something that often is in the syllabus, and I highly recommend that. It's also helpful, again, for students to know what your expectations are and how they can meet them. My suggestion is to add them to somehow into your course where it's something the students can easily find. We all have our own thoughts on students and their maybe lack of reading the syllabus, especially more than once. So if you would just add the same, do a copy and paste from a Word document into your course somewhere that they'll be able to find it easily. Will help them know how you're going to grade and how things are going to allow them to keep on track with what's going on in the course. The next is let them know how they can find their grades and their feedback, especially if they're new to online or maybe they've been more of a traditional student. Giving them the instructions on how to do that can be really helpful. This is something that you can kind of create and kind of just add to all of your courses. Once it's done, it just is really easy to kind of copy over. But also, I talked about how you're going to communicate with your students. Also let them know the frequency and the kind of the time that you are going to take to grade and provide them with feedback. That can kind of be a different thing. I had a conversation with a group of faculty members yesterday where, they do a lot more of sort of formative feedback. So they're not necessarily doing a formal grade for something. But, students can be really anxious if they're not hearing back from you. And so this is kind of twofold, because not only is it really great to kind of commit to your students when they will hear back from you, but then they're not asking. They're not necessarily an hour after a due date of an assessment asking you when grades are going to be available. It gives you the time to kind of do the proper feedback and proper grading. But within a good time zone so that they can, again, keep track of their progress. This is another thing that I just added to this particular workshop, and it's a new feature that's coming out in the upgrade in May, and it's the goal performance dashboard. And again, I'm just going to talk briefly about this. This can be a really amazing tool, but it's something that you have to put some real serious work into. This isn't the type of tool, we've got all kinds of emergency vehicles behind me, so hopefully my microphone is picking my voice up more than the noise in the background. But if this is something that you're interested in, what it's designed to do is, if you add goals or student outcomes into your course and then align all your assessments with those particular goals, then this dashboard will collect all of the data and kind of give you this indicator of how well the students are doing, or even how well, kind of an aggregate result of how well all of the students are doing in your course. So, we just as some examples on this screenshot that I took, the first goal that the faculty member, again, had to add into the course, these things don't just pop up on their own, adhere to legal practice standards, including all federal, state, and institutional regulations. So that is a outcome that this course requires. And below it says this particular gauge right now is showing 1 out of 2 assessments. So the next step the faculty would have to do is align the assessments to this goal. And so in this case, the students have taken 1 out of 2 assessments, and it looks like with this green dashboard line here that they're really seeming to meet this goal performance standard. And then you can see some of the other ones. Sort of this yellow indicator says it's foundational. The red indicator says needs improvement. I imagine as these things kind of unfold, it'll kind of go from red to green as things improve. But again, another great way in order to know how your students are doing, and again, being able to track their progress. So again, we're testing that. That'll come out in the next upgrade, and over the next year or so, I hope that we will hear more from everyone on how they're using that tool, and I think it has the potential to be really, really valuable. So my next thing, I did say that this all should keep your students on track. What could you do to keep yourself on track? And one of the things I think is important is, you know what, pull out that calendar. If you're using the course calendar, or maybe you're using your Outlook calendar and you really like to keep yourself organized that way, make sure that you're pacing yourself in a way that works for you. And I can't tell you what that is. That just takes a little bit of reflection and time. So, you know, whether you want to do your grading different times a week, maybe you like to set up your communication different times a week. Maybe you just like to throw it all in the weekend where you really like to focus and get in the flow and get everything done. Whatever works for you. Just kind of think about that, because when you're in the thick of things, when you're delivering that online course, you know how things can kind of get ahead of you or unravel. And so taking that time to kind of pace yourself is really going to save probably a lot of heartache, again, when you're kind of in the thick of things. Again, you're pulling out that calendar and you're looking, if you know that there's going to be an extended period of time where you're not going to be able to tap in as often as you like, let your students know that up front so both of you can prepare for that time. Whether it be you're going to just this one time extend your grading period, or you won't be able to get back to the discussions board as often as you'd like. Identify that and share that with your students to reduce that anxiety across the board. Another good way, strategy for your grading is to use your rubrics. And so Blackboard has these great interactive rubrics. They seem like a lot of work up front, but the payback is great when you're in again, the throw of things and you're in the middle of delivering and teaching your online course. The fact that you've set up those rubrics ahead of time and you can use them over and over again isn't a great grading efficiency, but it's also a great way to give your students some quick feedback that will maybe help them in the short term, and then allow you to maybe spend some more time with either the projects or the students that are going to need some more thoughtful feedback. So in my screen here, I say that, you know, just by setting up those rubrics, you're going to reinforce your expectation. And just by a click of a button, you're going to give them some sort of feedback because it's described in the rubric. In this particular case, I've checked off the exceeds expectation box. So quick feedback might be really appropriate because they are kind of doing really well. In the case where maybe they're below expectations, you are giving them that quick feedback, but then you have this option down below for some more personalized or more specific feedback. Again, that at least allows them some quick feedback where they can make some changes immediately. So staying on this sort of feedback trail, another piece of advice that I think we always want to do face-to-face or online is just to keep this big bank of common feedback phrases. And the reason I sort of say want is because you know, we always have these great thoughts, and then like life happens and it can be kind of hard to do. But use today as a reaffirmation of, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep a wonderful bank of common feedback phrases. So I've got some here. I've kind of put them into two different columns, positive and constructive. I think what I love about having a bank of common feedback phrases is it kind of forces me to go beyond some really either underwhelming feedback, like instead of just great work, which we can tend to do, I'm being a little bit more specific. Great work on outlining the project. So I'm being more specific, exactly what they did and what it was I liked. I'm seeing improvement in identifying key concepts, so that shows growth. If I jump over to the sort of constructive side, in the second one, I always like, I'm being really specific. Could you expand on this idea of reconstruction? So I'm being specific on what I want them to expand on. And I'm giving something to them that's really measurable that would really improve their work. Include an example. So then, if, say they had, I give them an opportunity for a draft, and now they're revising, or maybe it's the second phase of a project. Hopefully, they're going to then give me that example, and I can see that they've improved on that work. Is this always going to work? I've got this bank of feedback, and every single instance I'm going to be able to do that? No. But in this case, I might be able to kind of mix and match some of these phrases. So instead of could you expand on the idea of reconstruction, it could be a completely different topic. Whatever they're including may be something completely different. But I can kind of use that sentence structure to remind me that I want to give them something specific and something measurable in order to make that feedback really meaningful and give them some ways that they can improve their work. Does anyone out there, you have a bank of feedback phrases? I've been kind of maybe shaming myself with saying I always wanted to have this amazing bank of feedback that I wish was bigger. But please share if you're one of those overachievers. So we're kind of getting in the last 15 minutes of the workshop. And so I'm going to switch gears again, and I'm going to talk about some ways I think that when you're delivering an online course, you can support your students and their success. That's a huge deal for us here at NIU. And I think it's something that we can all kind of grab onto. So how do we do this in an online environment? So one of the ways we can do that is, to find out what it is they want support on. And a pre-survey is a good way of doing that. One of the great things that I like to do, and that I've heard from a lot of people in a pre-survey, is ask students what their goals are for the course. What are their personal outcomes that they'd like to accomplish in that course? And, they feel supported that way, and it might kind of give you some direction on what sort of things that you want to kind of ramp up, and maybe what things that you might want to back down on. Why would you want to back down? Because you're doing these things to meet your learning objectives. Well, then maybe your survey is on content knowledge that they're walking in with, and so maybe that content knowledge is better than expected, and now you can kind of dig deeper into some of those topics that you always hoped you could dig deeper into. So a pre-survey is a good thing to use. The next one I'm going to suggest is having some sort of virtual office hour. That can take on a variety of roles. That could be something that you may have weekly, monthly, consistently, or it could be more sporadic, where maybe it's before a big assessment or before a big phase of a project. Some way that the students can get sort of this live one-on-one interaction with you and with each other, because they often might be sort of shy to speak up, but they're going to hear other concerns and questions. And so a virtual office hour is a great way to accomplish that. You can also use this sort of web conferencing service for a one-on-one conference. Kind of jumping back to the retention center, you can have some online time with the students if you kind of want to really go over a struggle and come up with some solutions. So you can use Virtual Collaborate Ultra like we're using this afternoon for our session. The last year, we've been using Ultra sort of in a testing environment, and we've had lots of folks jump on and help us test it and kind of use it put it through its paces. It will be one of the new features that will be added during the upgrade. So everyone will be able to use it after the upgrade at the end of May. So again, another sort of enhancement to this particular workshop, because I'm so excited that I don't have to just talk about this as a test environment now, but it will be an option for all of us to use. I always sort of pause at different intervals for questions, but in this case, I'm actually suggesting that a best practice for when you're delivering an online course is to have some area where the students can ask questions. And they're called a few different things. Sometimes you do create FAQs if it's something that you know is going to pop up, and the students can kind of just refer to that. Sometimes it's called a Q&A discussion or a help discussion. You can be kind of creative and do kind of a got a question or something. And it allows the students to, again, ask their questions, but also to maybe answer each other and start to interact with each other as they're answering these questions. If you see a common question that's coming up, that may mean that there has to be something that needs to be tweaked, because if the question keeps kind of coming up, that's sort of feedback to you that maybe there's a way that you can clarify something a little bit more. So definitely using something like an FAQ or a Q&A discussion can really help students who are maybe struggling and need some clarification. A little bit of an expansion on that is using what I call the muddiest point. And so if there's some sort of misconception or some kind of concept that it just seems like maybe the students are internally struggling with, and they don't know how to quite share this, using some sort of activity that allows them to share their muddiest point kind of opens them up to this safe place in which they can sort of admit that they're sort of struggling with something. Something that I've done even face-to-face, and we've called it Muddiest Point. There's all types of different face-to-face activities, strategies that we've used that, again, it just takes a little bit of a shift of approach to be able to use in your online course, whether it be teamwork or presentations or even partnering activities, that if you just kind of think about it and shift that approach, you can use it when delivering your online course. The final thing I'll say about the Muddiest Point is I found that using the Blackboard journal is a really good way of allowing the students to really reflect on their learning, but also to kind of reflect and overcome some of the struggles that they've had. So supporting your student learning, this is a point that I think is really good, and we can sort of forget about, but remember that there's so many NIU support units, and that if you're finding that the students are struggling with something, just reach out and refer them to some of these support units. Or if there's something that comes up while you're delivering a course, add it to your course and just continue semester after semester, because there may be more students out there that are looking for these support units. So what is that? So one of them is the Do It Service Desk. So if students are having technical difficulties, then by all means, let them know that there's plenty of support for them. And I just added a link. If you're familiar with what was called the help desk, they're now called the service desk. And so there's some information about that. Next, a very important one, and you should add this to your course right now for your students, is the Disability Resource Center. So many good resources for students with disabilities that you just can't believe, talking to other universities, what great resources we have here. Next one, and I'm kind of just blasting through these. Click on these links. Look at all these amazing resources. I think you'll be impressed. How do I add DRC to my course? Actually, what you would do is add a course link, or just in a item that you're adding to the course. You can just use a hyperlink and use the URL that I actually just added into the text chat area, and that way your students will be able to just click on that link, and all the contact information on how to kind of get in touch with the DRC are right there for them. So hopefully that answers your question. Here's one. If you dig around, you're going to find different resources that makes more sense maybe to your course. This is actually from the University Writing Center, and the University Writing Center now has online sessions for writing help, and they use Google Hangouts, and there's tutors there that are helping them. So if you thought that the Writing Center was a resource that wasn't available for your online students, there is. And then finally, I said, you want to acknowledge that your students have a future career ahead of them. So if you want to introduce them to career services, another great resource that we have here at the university. Again, just a few. Look at your college. There may be even more available to your students, so it just takes a little bit of digging. I did provide those links for you because, hey, if I already found them, I'm going to share them with you. Finally, we have some best practices that just kind of didn't fit into a category very well, so I'm just going to briefly share them with you in the last few minutes here. Take advantage of the student preview mode if students are struggling with where to find something, or again, that question keeps coming up, use the student preview mode, and you may see, get your own answer of why they're not necessarily seeing things. Just a interesting way to structure things that make things easier when you're delivering that course is to reverse order. So always the latest week sort of comes up on top. They're not scrolling down. Another kind of good practice. Set availability restrictions. That way things are going to kind of reveal themselves as you're delivering the course, and students are kind of jumping ahead, which can really complicate things when the course is happening, and use those due dates. Finally, if you're using discussion boards, make sure you check that enable grading. If you're grading, that's going to speed up your efficiency when you're grading the discussion boards. I'm hearing the chimes, so I'm going really fast now. But I think a really important one is to model any behaviors that you want out of your students, again, to kind of meet those expectations. This is what we talked about this afternoon, all about communication. Biggest point is to do it often. To grading your students' work, use your tools. Remember to use your resources that you have out there to support your students, and take care of yourself. That is going to help you take care of your students. So again, I'm Tracy Miller, and that's my email down below. Feel free to reach out to me, and if you have any more questions, you will be hearing from me in the next few days with the link to the archive and a short survey, so that I can keep on track and receive feedback from you in order to make more improvements to all of my workshops. Thank you so much. If you're here in Northern Illinois, the sun is shining. It's still a little brisk, but let's hope for an amazing weekend, end of semester. Enjoy your summer. See you soon.